Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Longwy, playing as the Empire against the Skaven, with an attempt at making use of the Empire's heavy artillery. And as you can see, we do have two cannons, one of which is the Hammer of the Witches, one of which is the normal Great Cannon. The reason I brought these guys was because I wanted to test out just how much more accurate, or if really it was how much more accurate, or if at all more accurate, the Empire artillery I had gotten. I want to see how tangible it was, and I figured against Skaven there's a good chance it'll bring some big monsters. Most of the Skaven builds, actually really all of them, have some sort of large units. There are a few infantry rushes that you don't see all that often, but even those usually bring a Doom Wheel, and so I figured, no matter what my opponent does, I'm probably going to have a target for the Great Cannons. Whether that be a Helped Abomination, whether that's a Plague Priest, artillery pieces, whatever. Otherwise, I figured, I can defend them pretty effectively. The front line has gotten cheaper, so here we got Sigmar's Sons backing up 3 units of Greatswords, as well as a Warrior Priest. The Warrior Priest's improvements over the last few patches, I think, have made him a pretty competitive pick, and definitely a good buff for the front line. You can see I did bring Soulfire. This is actually, once again, a bit of a niche tool, but it could be good against, say, Plague Priests with Plague Priest Sensor Bearer, or Plague Monk Sensor Bearers. It can be good against to help you guys survive against some magic, because Skaven do have some magic damage in their roster. Shield of Faith, of course, for additional ward save. Benediction for extra leadership. I found this is actually incredibly useful. +8 leadership on top of the Encourage Aura is just so strong. And then, of course, Hammer of Sigmar to make these guys hit that much more efficiently, and hopefully hack through and slash through anything they face. And on a 60-second cooldown, it's a really powerful ability. We do have 2 Free Company Militia in case my opponent did bring a bunch of Rat Ogres or big monsters. These guys won't do well against, say, a Plague Furnace because it's got so much armor. It's still got 90 armor despite the nerfs, so it's really tanky, and these guys won't do much against that, but against Rat Ogres they'll do okay. And they can act as a secondary line to defend the cannons if need be. In the back, single unit of Knights of the Blazing Sun, very high on shock damage. They can just run roughshod over Skaven infantry, and depending on what the situation demands, they can also help shut down Doom Wheels or units like that, because I don't have the best counters here to Doom Wheels besides Boris and the Knights, really. Outriders with grenade launchers in case my opponent went really wide to help clear up the chaff, because all Greatswords will generally do pretty well. They will start getting tired, and you'll definitely start having issues, I think, clearing out blobs eventually. So depending on how atrocious my opponent planned to make things, I wanted a little bit of more chaff clearance here, because I did invest very heavily into these cannons. A Jade Wizard providing heals, of course. Obviously, you want some lore. You want a little bit of lore of life just to keep these guys alive. Some Earthblood to keep these troops tip top. Knights of the Blazing Sun, of course, could use a regrowth every now and then, so it can be pretty good. Then Boris Todbringer, of course, up here on his Griffin. I actually did bring Hold the Line now. I think the buff actually makes it worthwhile. Obviously, you're going to be flitting from part of the map to part of the map, but usually he's not exactly a Lord Sniper. He's more of a support Lord. So I think you get good value out of Hold the Line. Crush the Weak, of course, great melee defense debuff. Midland Runefang providing heals, and White Cloak of Ulrich reducing melee damage. Over here you can see my opponent's catapults already knocking off a poor Outrider here. You can see the horse just flying through the air there. But the moment I saw my opponent have artillery, I was duck and covering with the Outriders, and my artillery opened fire in the counter battery roll. Now, granted, you can see my opponent here is in a little bit of a dip, so it's not an ideal sort of target for my cannons, but at this range there is some arc on the cannonballs, so they will be able to start clipping these Plague Claws. For my opponent's build, a very wide build, there are Death Runners out on the flank, ready to kind of dart in on my backline. The front line is composed of Clan Rat shields, so nothing too fancy. Skaven Slaves to cushion the assault. Clan Rats with shields actually trade okay with Empire Swordsmen. They'll do alright. Not amazing. They'll lose, but they'll trade okay. And especially backed by buffs from their Lord or from magic and all that sort of stuff, they'll do fine. They are backed, of course, by units of Gutter Runners, Slingers with Poison here. 2 Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, Stormvermin Halberds covering the artillery against cavalry, and Clan Rat Spears covering the periphery, so always a good choice there. Surprisingly enough, my opponent did bring Plague Claw Catapults, and you can see they're in a bit of an artillery duel with my own artillery battery. The Warlord here, equipped with Verminous Valor, Rally, and Deadly Onslaught. He's on a Bone Breaker. You can see these. You almost never see these guys, but it actually looks pretty cool. Look at that helmet. It's pretty awesome. But then my opponent does have a Plague Priest with most, if not all, of his spells. He is on a Plague Furnace, and I think he's actually got every spell in the book, so pretty interesting. I wouldn't really recommend bringing all spells, usually just a few summons maybe. Nonetheless, you can see the cannons already working hard to bring the Plague Claws to heal, and you can see they've already lost a model. My opponent trying to trundle forward. Not entirely sure if he thought to counter battery me or get shots in my backline. Regardless, when my opponent saw I had cannons, he should start pushing immediately. I think that this is a big mistake, waiting here, trying to do any artillery damage. And these clumped up Stormmen here are actually taking some horrid damage from the cannons. You can see the last volley of artillery fire shatters this Plague Claws. Last two guns. Although my opponent did get a nice little volley there against the Free Company, which were a little more boxed up. 7 models for about basically 1,000 gold down the drain is something I'll accept. That's a very acceptable loss. And you can see now my artillery is going to shift fire onto the Warlord. My opponent being slow and a bit indecisive, so this was very beneficial for me. I assume my opponent might have been a little new in this game, but I definitely think this shows just how good the Empire artillery can be. I think it's definitely gotten a lot more accurate. Granted, Skaven artillery has never been the best at surviving counter battery fire, but within 2 volleys, the Empire cannons, or maybe it was 3 volleys. I think 3 volleys, they essentially knocked out a Plague Claw catapult. That's better than what you'd expect normally. And I think that they might be a little better now in the counter battery role. Probably not as good as the Dwarf cannons, which are still more accurate, but definitely better. You can see the artillery fire just raining down. My opponent very blobbed here. Big mistake. He should have tried to spread out and try to go wide. He could have honestly, with this sort of build, he does have enough models to sort of saturate my front line. Get the Plague Monks and Sir Bears in there against the Great Swords, and then sweep around the flanks with Clanrat Spears, with Stormmen, and units like that. Nonetheless, he is trying to push forward. I did immediately order my cannons to focus out his Warlord because Lord sniping against Skaven especially, it's so powerful. You can see these Plague Monks and Sir Bears, because of that blobbing, are suffering horribly. Here my opponent does try to be sneaky, but I do spot his Death Runners. He pops concealment bombs. I just simply zone him away with the Jade Wizard and the Free Company. Free Company, while they would lose the Death Runners in probably in a pretty ugly manner, they've got okay enough melee stats to where they can trade with Death Runners for at least a little while. You can see they've got more HP. They don't have the physical resist, and their armor's pretty comparable, but they can trade for a while. In the meantime, this poor Warlord is having a terrible time. He's starting to crest this ridge, and my cannons at this point are going to be struggling to get really line of sight on him. You can see one more volley in there, pounding the poor guy, dropping him down to 1,000 HP before he is actually going to break. And I do send my knights at him, but I'm going to stop them because he does run into the trees, he disappears, and my knights actually, I think, break formation. I forget if they broke off or if I ordered them to switch targets. Regardless, you can see the front line fight going down very quickly here. Now, my Great Swords normally would cleave through these Skaven infantrymen pretty effectively, but with the buffs from the Warrior Priest, this is going to be an absolute massacre. These Clan Rats, these Skaven slaves are going to collapse really quickly, and in comes Boris with his debuffs, with the Shield of Faith going down on him, and despite all my opponents' sort of poison applying to Boris and debuffing him, you can see the tear out happening, and you can see the rain of grenades coming in there and completely shattering those Skaven. Just look at that arc and the grenade launchers draining it. To change this to arcing weaponry, where they now get a good, very high angle arc, has been huge. You can see the Knights of the Blazing Sun actually, with Boris's terror support, managed to shatter or break the Clanrat spears and are now pushing into the backline. That's just going to leave these isolated Plague Monks and Sir Bears who really just can't hold their own. Over on the periphery, this flank was going a lot worse. My opponent did summon some Plague Monks who are coming in for rear charges against the Great Swords. Obviously, the Great Swords have good armor, but nonetheless, these guys will be doing some good damage. Sons of Sigmar, or Sigmar Sons, while they will do well against Clan Rats and Skaven Slaves and all that sort of stuff, they will eventually get sort of worn down. So this was where things were looking a little heated. Unfortunately for my opponent, he had already lost his artillery. You can see the Outriders with grenade launchers here positioning to get better arcs or better shots with their grenade launchers. And you can see these poor great Stormmen Halberds just feeding in a terrible sort of formation here and taking grenades to the face. And those grenades do a lot of damage, even against armored units. So honestly, while it's one of those units you almost never see used in Quake Match, I'm not entirely sure why that is. They're a very niche unit. They're good against infantry, and that's about it. But they are really good against infantry. Regardless, my cannon whittling down my opponent's Plague Priest, and you can see the Plague Priest having a terrible time. Boris is on him too now. Of course, with his terrible melee defense and all the debuffs going down from the Todbringer, he's in for a very bad day. The Plague Monks have shattered, and that is really essentially just leaving my opponent's pocket right here. And that's it. The Plague Monks broke under fire, and over here in the backline, my opponent finally did commit his Death Runners. You can see they are winning against the Free Company Militia, and the Free Company is definitely not getting the better side of this battle. But, in a drawn-out fight, they're whittling the Death Runners down a little bit, and they're buying time for the artillery to keep working. And I finally do turn the Free Company around here to start peppering these guys down. You can see these guys aren't really breaking. Leadership's okay. The front line's completely buckled for my opponent. We still got the Warrior Priest, the Great Swords here, just pushing through. Cannon fire continuously working on the Plague Priest, and my opponent's poor Bonebreaker here getting caught in the trees. Boris diving in and just teaching this guy a lesson, not to mess with the Todbringer there. So the poor Warlord is in full retreat. I'm not a fan of the Warlord. I think he needs better items, in my opinion, to make him more viable. Besides being cheap, he's just not good. I don't know. Maybe there's something I'm missing about him, but honestly, you never see him in quick match, and he doesn't serve much of a niche. Regardless, for my opponent's army at this point, it's basically game over. You can see the grenades just firing away. Maybe we can get a nice little slow mo before everything is over. Look at these things; they're like little mortar bombs or something, and they're just piling into these poor Skaven and sending filthy rats flying. So, unfortunately, I do think this is going to be it for the game, but you can see these filthy rats just getting destroyed by a volley of high explosives, and that is going to be a game, guys. Here in the back line, real quickly, you can see that my opponent actually did eventually break the free company, but we were able to sort of plug it up with the second unit. So, going over the list real quick, it's not necessarily the most competitive list. I do think, though, it's a viable and workable list against Skaven. No matter what your opponent brings, you've got some counters for it. You've got counters to all the sorts of nasty, monstrous builds your opponent might bring. The one problem I could see for this build would be a horde of Rat Ogres backed by Skaven slaves, because you don't really have quite enough tools to take all of that down. Your cannons won't be able to kill them fast enough, and great swords don't do too well against Rat Ogres, not in a cost efficiency manner at any rate. So you'd probably get oversaturated. But besides that, I do think that this, and even then you might be able to hold it. Between the Free Company, those sort of lists usually don't have flanking units, so between the Free Company, the Knights of the Blazing Sun, which are pretty good against Rat Ogres on the charge, the grenade launchers to clear off Skaven slaves and that sort of stuff, you might be able to pull it off even there, especially with Lore of Life backing. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that against most Skaven builds, this is pretty respectable. Regardless, I was pretty impressed with the cannons. 33 and 50 kills, that doesn't really say much in a game where my opponent brought a horde of chaff. Then again, it was all collateral damage. Most of those shots were due to misses or piercing shots on my opponent's big targets. So they got some value. You can see this cannon actually gained 2 chevrons over the course of the game, which I think does show just how much damage it was doing. It can definitely do if it goes unimpeded or uninterrupted, and there's a good chance that'll happen against Skaven. Skaven don't really have the tools to interrupt your artillery outside of counter battering you themselves, but they don't, due to their large model size on, say, Warp Lightning, they struggle to do counter battering properly. So outside of that, the cannons will trade really well, and I think they're definitely a little better. I don't know if I'd say they're great for Empire, but the great cannons are definitely a lot better than they used to be. And in this game, they wiped out an entire Plague Claw catapult. I guess it's only 9. I forgot it's a Plague Claw, not Warp Lightning, so it was only 900 gold, I think. But regardless, they did wipe out a Plague Claw fairly quickly, and then they helped wipe out the Warlord and the Plague Priest over time. So, and honestly, it didn't even take them that long. Now, granted, my opponent was a little slow on the draw. If he'd pushed in a little more aggressively, things could have snowballed a little faster. But nonetheless, cannons are good. Great swords, so much better than they used to be, just by being cheaper, and with the buffs, the Warp Priests, you can just make them such murder machines, especially against factions like Skaven. But they're even good against High Elves. I'm really liking great swords more and more nowadays. Free Company, not much to say there. They're Free Company. I think they're a decent pick of this matchup, simply because they do well against most Skaven monsters, but and they can defend themselves against summons somewhat, but they're okay. Knights of the Blazing Sun, really good job. Of course, they run people down like nobody's business. Warrior Priest doing some damage, more important for the buffs, of course. Wizard, no damage, but heals. And Boris, of course, dishing out a good bit of hurt, mostly, once again, debuffing. It's really more about the debuffs and buffs for this sort of squad. But, yeah, I'm pretty happy with Empire right now. I do think they still have some rough matchups. Dark Elves, for example, are right now, I think, one of the worst matchups for Empire. But outside of that, honestly, I think besides Dark Elves and Wood Elves, which I think are the 2 really bad matchups for Empire, I think the faction's in a pretty good spot right now, and I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah. Regardless, guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below if you haven't already. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.